Okay, well, thank you everyone for joining today's webcast. Again, I'm Tim Marsh, founder and head of strategy at MDB. As always, if you like the content today, hit the like button and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on any of our future updates. With me today is Marie Petre. Marie and I got to know each other while working at GS1, and I'm happy that she's able to join us today. Marie, why don't you tell our audience a little bit about yourself and your background?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Tim, for inviting me to your podcast today. So I'm a lawyer by training, and I have practiced law in private practice in international law firms as a corporate and commercial lawyer for a few years before joining GS1, where we met. And at GS1 Global Office, I was general counsel for 8 years. And so, regarding the topic of today, well, I've been able to think quite a lot over the years about collaboration and how it's a complex topic. Currently, I'm on a career break and I'm actually studying sustainability transformation here in Brussels at a business school. And that's how we reconnected, because it's a topic that links us both. So that's a little bit about me.
Thank you. And really happy to have you here with us today. So Marie and I are going to talk about something prescient that just occurred within the sustainability arena. And I'm going to let, of course, Marie do most of the talking because that's who you want to hear from here today. But it's around collaboration and standards. And really regarding the recent news coming out of the Science-Based Targets Initiative, SBTI, which sort of, in some respects, shocked the industry by going around their rules. And you may not all know what I'm referring to. So Marie's done her homework on this quite diligently, and coming from the public policy and the legal aspects, she can kind of break it down for us and to what it means. So by all means, Marie, please.
Yeah, so what happened at the SBTI, which, as you said, stands for Science-Based Targets Initiative. And if you're not familiar with this organization, it's a voluntary initiative, and it helps companies to set emission reduction targets in line with the latest climate science. And to do that, it sets standards. And one of its most famous standards is the corporate net zero standard. And it certifies then the climate targets that the companies decide to voluntarily set against those standards. So in the last few years, SBTI has actually become really important as an organization and very trusted by many people in the industry, but also beyond in the investor community, because it has created a lot of clarity, transparency, and rigor around this whole climate target topic. And you know that, most companies now are declaring in some way or another a climate target, and it used to be really based a little bit on flimsy statements. And SBTI has really been key in bringing this rigor, and this is really important for investors, for regulators and stakeholders, like employees, to really understand where a company stands. And so if you're a bit familiar with climate targets, you may know that in the cutting of carbon emissions, you may know that carbon offsetting is a really controversial topic. So SBTI did not allow, and still does not allow in its standard, to use carbon offsetting as a way to reduce carbon emissions in order for a company to meet its targets. But then, very surprisingly, on 9 April, the board of SBTI issued a statement saying that they would allow it. So that really startled the industry and the whole sustainability community. And to add on top of that, what happened is that the staff at SBTI wrote a letter to the board, which was leaked. I don't know how, but it was leaked into the press. And what the staff told the board was, well, you're not respecting the standard operating procedures and the governance to create our standards. And there's actually never been a decision. This has actually not followed the required process to be decided that carbon offsetting would be allowed. And so this kind of triggered also a response from the board saying, yes, that's actually correct. No decision has been taken. And then, a lot of media interest over here in Europe, but also in the US, with everybody kind of questioning, has SBTI kind of lost its credibility? So that was a bit what happened there that triggered our thoughts about all of that.
Yeah. So, and this is a big deal because, as Marie and I know, we're both strong advocates of global standards and the processes that bring standards together, and whether it be GS1 or CEN or CSA for Canada or ISO or ANSI in the United States. And what this signifies is that going around the rules in terms of how they normally develop and bringing the right consensus and industry perspectives forward to this. I think it actually really does risk their brand as an initiative. And I can imagine, companies and organizations questioning the extent to which SBTI will actually be impactful in terms of sustainable outcomes. So time will tell. We will have to see what sort of damage control SBTI actually does over the coming weeks as this progresses. But let's explore the process a little bit further. I think, Marie, you have some really good, interesting perspectives on why the process is so important when you're talking about open standards that you want industry members to embrace and use, and of course how they kind of went around that in this case. But you and I are no stranger to this, but maybe for our viewers, you can tie in the collaboration piece with the process piece to give it meaning.
Yes, totally. I think there are a couple of very good reasons for having process. And I want to stress that, process sounds incredibly boring and, like it's slow and not agile, but, it's actually really necessary. And especially when you have this context of collaboration of the industry, and in this case also of regulators and, international organizations like WWF is also involved in SBTI. It's necessary when you have this kind of collaboration to have actually a really strong process in place. And the reason for that is that the process is what's going to give legitimacy to the standard at the end of the day. And it's also what is giving the companies that want to participate in standard development a kind of legally safe space to develop a standard, and because this leads to discussions with potentially competitors. And so if you'll allow me, I'll try to explain a little bit more in detail what I mean by this. But so if you look, for example, at the legitimacy question,
please.
I looked at the SBTI SOPs, and they're actually really robust. So they have a whole process to develop the standards that involves a lot of experts, but also involves extensive consultation with the market. So they really go out into the communities and the companies that use the standard to find out what are their difficulties, what are the changes that they needed to do to this corporate net zero standards. And they gather all this information under this process. Now, this brings a lot of information and legitimacy and participation into the standard, and but you have to follow that process to have that legitimacy. And I was, in the case of SBTI, that was really the problem that happened. So I was exchanging a little bit with other people on that topic. And for example, there was a professor at Copenhagen Business School called Andreas Rasch, and I think he put it very clearly. When you have a voluntary standard, so not something that is mandated by the authorities, but something where industry gets together to decide to do things a specific way, then legitimacy is your key currency. And this legitimacy can only be achieved if on the input side, you're transparent, inclusive in your decision making, if you have, a process that you follow, and this will then benefit the legitimacy of the standard on the output side. So the legitimacy on the output side is that you have a standard that creates impact and that is also recognized as creating impact by the users, if you like. And so that was really the problem with this SBTI debacle, I would say, is that because on the input side, they circumvented the process completely, the standard on the output side is going to lack in legitimacy. And when you don't have legitimacy, then there's no broad adoption. When you have the legitimacy of having built that standard with the industry, then of course the industry is going to be more keen to adopt it. And so it's really a virtuous cycle if it's done well. So the second reason, and that's not really to do with SBTI, that's more, as a lawyer, something that I've observed these days when we talk about sustainability. A lot of companies realize that they need to collaborate with other companies, either their peers and competitors or companies in their supply chain. And I see a lot of very enthusiastic initiatives springing up around that. But you need to also make sure that you have a clear process in place. So, for example, when you have collaboration and discussion about, standardized approaches to something, where you're talking about technology, when you need to have IP licensing commitments in place. You remember we had the IP policy at GS1, for example. So that's really important for the companies in the group to avoid, having like lawsuits against them based on, infringements of IP in the future. And then the second point is you need to have clear rules around what you can discuss and what you cannot discuss. So to avoid competition or antitrust law issues. So it's not because you're sitting all together at the same table for a higher cause that is, a sustainable higher cause, does not mean that you can just discuss and exchange information on anything, So you need to make sure when you collaborate with your competitors on a sustainability topic that you have an explicit process and documents that tell, the members of the group, this is what we can discuss about and this we cannot discuss about. So that's really my two big recommendations around the legitimacy and the legal aspect, that the process, this very boring thing, is actually really important.
Yes, but my takeaways too from your thoughts on this and your actual experience and practice is that the process we've done and designed well provides transparency for those who are participating and for those that aren't participating, yes. Who may be then consuming the standard after the fact. And then your rules around behavior and code of conduct and what you can and can't discuss basically keeps everybody safe in the process, through the process of the standards development, so that they're not running afoul of some a particular regulation or law in some area, only to find that they've done that later and then ruin the whole output of their collaborative work. So, and really at the core, as you say, I agree with you, is that collaboration is key with global standards. It's one thing to be a regulator or a legislator and legislate from ignorance, because we know that happens all the time, not intentionally, mostly, but just because, regulators aren't technical experts in certain things and they're not all experts in everything that they have to regulate on. But the standards collaboration process kind of helps make sense of some of that. So great discussion. I guess what would you, if this would have happened to us when we were both at GS1, what would you have done? We didn't talk about this prior, but what would have been your remedy to something like this occurring? I don't think it would have ever happened at GS1, quite frankly. But if it would have, what do you think you might advise leadership and the members to do?
Well, I've thought about that, and frankly, I did think, wow, we were lucky that this never happened. GS1 has been in existence for almost 50 years, I think, and is very well trained in the whole standard development process. And I think that the industry members that work with GS1 also know that. But I mean, there have been times where people want to cut corners, and we've always pushed back, and you try to reason people on that. For me, one of the things that was kind of interesting in the SBTI case is I read, I think it was in the Financial Times, that there was some pressure in the corridors, let's say, or in the background, from the authorities and from charitable organizations that had reasons that could be legitimate to say maybe we should look at allowing carbon offsetting. I'm not really expert enough to say whether they're right or not, but what I would say is that they really did not understand what a voluntary standard is, and they should not. They undermined their own effort. If the effort was to look at the problem from both sides and to really weigh up, the benefit of allowing carbon offsets versus the disadvantage of allowing carbon offsets, and that's the beauty of the standard development, is that it allows you to have all the different viewpoints and to have the collective intelligence of the community, of the users deciding this is the right thing to do. But so what they did was to go in the background, and they also even undermined their own goal, because I think that a lot of companies today will hesitate to set a carbon emission target with SBTI because they know that the public does not really trust anymore that this is an organization that is solely based on science. So I am very I feel a lot for the SBTI team, because I can imagine that the pressure must have been very high. Also, I have to say, Tim, that, I think that emotions run much higher on this topic of carbon offsetting and carbon accounting than around the identification of products. So we've been lucky that the community we worked with at GS1 was with a lot of very reasonable people. But I would have just tried to convince again of a voluntary standard. It's an industry-led process where you have agreed, we're going to entrust this part of the process to the experts, then we're going to consult with the community. And that's what leads to this result based out of collective intelligence. So I'm not sure I responded to your question fully, but that's how I see it at this stage.
I think your answer is don't run afoul of the rules. Just follow the rules you set forth, and resist the political pressure to go around them. Which yes, you and I in our past have faced those pressures. I particularly in healthcare many years ago, with certain stakeholders wanting it, as we say in the United States, they wanted it their way or the highway. Mm-hmm. But that wasn't the standards process. We needed to go through the consensus building, the collaboration to get to, and maybe their way was going to win, but we weren't going to predetermine that.
Yes, and also the thing is, maybe at the end of the day, if this approach that they absolutely want wins, but if nobody applies it because it's actually not what the market needs, then because it has lost legitimacy in the process, then, they've also lost. So for me, that's really the lesson from this, is that the process benefits everybody. And, trying to go around it also in this day and age, always gets known. I mean, and here it was a little bit unfortunate that, of course, this was a statement of the SBTI board that said they had made a decision, which was what I think triggered really the staff to react, because now they, you cannot just say like, oh, I'm going to develop standards this way, but I make a decision that goes completely against it the other way. So,
yeah. So, Marie, Petre, thank you so much. I think we'll leave it there.
Okay.
So thank you again for your time and your generous offer to be a guest on the webcast. And I know you and I will continue to talk, and we'll follow each other's journey in the areas of sustainability and circularity. So for all of you, thank you for tuning in. If you like this content, please remember, hit the thumbs up down below and subscribe so you don't fail to miss any of the upcoming webcasts. Marie's LinkedIn profile and information will be in the notes below, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Tim. Bye-bye.